This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you!
Boring. Boring. Boring.
You got it. Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that. Remember what you're doing. You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel.
I call again for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the return of the sausages, the hostages.
Greetings on a very interesting day, if you're watching this live, for the BBC, our main competitor, I suppose. British Broadcasting Corporation's in a lot of trouble. I'll tell you why in a moment. Normally, if you're watching again this live on a Monday, we'd have Warren Thornton. Warren Thornton, who is our man in Manila, but he's got a few problems at the moment. They are in the middle of a massive typhoon, and that's basically knocked out his internet, and hopefully we'll get back to him soon. He did a series of broadcasts for us before all of this typhoon business occurred. You'll find all of those in the archive for Unprecedented and also on my X at Lembit Öpik. Let's hope it's not too bad. Winds predicted at 160 miles per hour. It's not the wind that does the harm, it's what it picks up and smashes into other things. So big best wishes to Warren, though, of course, he won't be able to communicate until the storm has passed. In the meantime, we'll talk about another storm which has been taking place here in the United Kingdom, and that's a storm which is affecting the British Broadcasting Corporation. You may have seen, if you've been watching the news, that Tim Davie, the Director General, essentially the man in charge, has resigned together with one of his number twos, all over what seems to be an absolutely shocking case of misinformation. How ironic, you might say. The BBC's charter says they have to be objective and fair and honest and unbiased. Well, there were none of those things as far as it seems with their reportage of the now President of the United States, Donald Trump. We're going to talk about what they did and why in a short while, but it's fair to say the BBC is now in crisis. Some say they had it coming to them. They've become rather arrogant and complacent. My own bugbear, of course, is the fact that they tell lies, in my view, about the non-existent climate emergency. I even saw one of their people, Chris Packham, who's some jokey sort of fellow who apparently cares about the environment and gets paid by the BBC, saying that we might not be able to breathe soon. Really? Let's put that into BBC Verify. But hold on, BBC Verify didn't notice that the BBC itself was making up faked videos about Donald Trump. What does that mean? How is it done? Well, there's one man we run to at times like this, arguably the most influential person in all of broadcasting in the world. Yes, it's Simon Spanswick, Chief Executive of the Association for International Broadcasting. Simon, thanks for joining us at quite short notice. How have you been?
I'm very well, thank you. Luckily, we're not suffering the storms and slings of outrageous weather that the Philippines is having. In fact, we've got our annual awards coming up later this week, and some people from the Philippines were due to attend, but can't because of the pictures that you've seen just a few moments ago. The weather is not good down there. It makes you grateful, actually, sometimes that you do live in the northern hemisphere where storms are few and far between of that sort of scale. So good luck to everybody in the Philippines, because they do get hit, and other parts in that neck of the woods get hit by weather like this, not irregularly.
Yeah, it looks quite exciting and dramatic, but Warren Thornton, our man in Manila, or very near it, isn't that pleased. He said when I asked him about it, it was 50-50 excitement and trepidation. They say there's going to be a storm surge of 3 meters, so the sea will rise 3 meters due to certain clever climatological effects, or well, meteorological effects, really. And also they're talking about 14-meter waves. That's an awful lot of water, really. I think I'd rather...
You wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of that. So good luck to Warren and everybody else out there.
But is it anything like as big a storm as the one facing the BBC? as we've just discovered, and this is one of those times where we can't avoid being live in our subject coverage, that two of the main people in the BBC have just resigned. That's Tim Davie and Deborah Turness, resigning with a Trump documentary edit. Let's take a step back first of all. What does the DG, Director General, do? We'll talk about why they resigned in a minute, but Director General is not a phrase in common parlance. What does it mean?
It's a phrase that's used, or a title that's used across quite a large number of broadcasting organizations here and in Germany and all over the place. And it's the person who is in charge, essentially the CEO of the organization. And that role in the BBC is also the editor-in-chief. In other words, all editorial decisions, the buck stops with the person who holds that position. So when something goes majorly wrong, and as it has in this case, the buck stops with the DG, who has been up until now. I think he's going to continue for a little while yet, whilst his successor is found. Is Tim Davie, who has been in the BBC about 30 odd years. He's worked in the commercial arm of the BBC, in BBC Studios, and for the last 2 or 3 years has held the position of Director General.
Who's the other person? Deborah Turness. She is the CEO of News. What does that mean? And who is she?
She runs the news division of the BBC, which encompasses television, radio, the World Service, and all the digital output. It's a huge part of the BBC's operation, with one of the biggest budgets and the most number of staff. And she was appointed a couple of years ago. She succeeded a woman called Fran Unsworth, who'd been in the BBC for a long, long time, whose title was Director of News. And when Deborah Turness came in, she changed the job title to CEO of BBC News. She'd grown up working for ITN, which is the commercial news organization here in the UK that provides news to ITV, which is the Channel 3 in the UK, and Channel 4 and Channel 5 news, and then went to work for NBC in America, and then ran Euronews, which is a pan-European broadcaster working in 20-odd languages across the European continent.
So those two pretty big names both resigned at once, obviously consulting with each other. I think it's important we explain in very simple terms what they've done. Now, you and I are both in the business, and it seems to me unforgivable. But as far as I can understand, despite all of the commitments in the BBC charter to be unbiased, to give the facts and all of that stuff, they faked it. They faked something about Donald Trump. Tell us about it.
It would appear that an episode of Panorama, which is a weekly current affairs program, runs either 30 or 60 minutes, which covers all sorts of topical stories, news stories, also does quite deep, serious investigations, broadcast an episode earlier this year where, it was last year before the election, just before the US election, where some footage from Trump's speech before the Capitol riots occurred were edited together. Many people are using the term splicing, which doesn't exist anymore because that was in the days of razor blades and so forth. But it edited this together to make him appear to say something that he did not say, which is a fundamental no-no for any broadcaster. And, I declare an interest. I worked for the BBC for many years. And one of the things that was drummed into us is that you do not change the meaning of anything that has happened by using spurious edits. You make it very clear when something isn't running right the way through. If it's a video, you put in a white flash to show that there's a transition between time. And that basic rule appears not to have been followed in this case. From what I can tell, this episode of Panorama was made by an independent producer. Many BBC programs and those of commercial networks are now made by independent producers. There's a big independent production community in the UK and in other parts of the world, indeed, that are commissioned to make programs. And in this case, it seems that the company involved made the program. It must have gone through the commissioning editors at the BBC and through the editorial chain, and nobody asked the sort of questions that should be asked. Was this exactly what was said by Trump on that particular day? Is the sense of what's been said correct? All those sort of fundamental editorial questions seem to either have not been asked, or the answers were sufficient for people to say, yes, that's all right, that can go to air.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of coverage in the other media. I think a lot of people rubbing their hands together over it, to be honest with you. BBC distorting Trump's speech, BBC doctored Trump's speech. And it's actually quite a serious accusation, because materially speaking, they made him look like a really bad guy. They made him look like he'd actually somehow, I don't know how exactly, but that he'd been somehow supporting or encouraging violence. That's the inference of it. And I don't really understand how anyone thinks they could get away with it. I mean, it's just like a shocking thing to do. It's obviously, as I say here, that I think it's GB News saying how happy they are about it. Although they're not saying they're happy about it, but I think they're gleefully reporting it. Here we are. Yeah, let's just say, no, put that back up, please. Yeah, we're going to have, yeah, there we are. We're going to walk down the Capitol, and all this, yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff coming up there from the BBC. And they show it side by side, and they splice two bits of speech together, which were 54 minutes apart. Now, that's a really dodgy thing to do. This is, I think, Donald Trump on the eve of the riots which took place in the White House. And the way they put it together, it made it sound like he was telling them to go and fight at Capitol Hill. And it just didn't work like that. The bit that they left out, as far as I recall, is that he was actually saying do it peacefully. He expressly said he didn't want any violence.
How that has clearly been lost from the way this was put together. And I cannot, having, as I said earlier, I worked for the BBC for a long time. We were all, we grew up in an environment where you simply didn't do that. Mm-hmm. I mean, even using archive material, I can remember we weren't allowed to make any edits for time, for example, even if it was the King's speech from 1939. You simply didn't do that because you weren't portraying life as it actually was. You weren't portraying the truth, even for historical things. So for something that's contemporaneous, it's even worse.
Here's the line: well, we fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. And they stuck that together with the first part to make it sound like he was implying that they fight like hell on Capitol Hill. Now, this is an extraordinary thing to have done. I've worked for the BBC, you've worked for the BBC, and when I was there, although I had increasing issues with what was being said, particularly in terms of the environmental agenda, my concern is it was completely beyond and apart from the things that I was taught. They still, certainly at the level I was working at, saying, get this right on the whole. They didn't always get it right, but they intended to. This was a deliberate act. This thing didn't splice itself together by accident, did it?
No. Somebody in the production company took that decision, having been commissioned by the BBC to make this episode of Panorama, and got it completely wrong. I'm sure there's going to be more fallout as a result of what's happened and the resignation of these two of the most senior people within the BBC over this program. It shows, I suppose, a lack of understanding of how a broadcaster should behave, particularly at a time when we're coming up to the renewal of the Royal Charter, which governs the BBC, and the way it's funded when the current license fee expires. Because at the moment here in the UK, everybody that watches live television has to pay for an annual television license fee, which funds the BBC, it funds the television operation, it funds radio, national and local, It funds children's channels, the whole of the BBC, around £4 billion pounds a year, give or take. It's a massive organisation. And I suppose any organisation of that sort of scale, you are going to have issues that arise from time to time. There's no doubt about that. You and I work for far smaller organisations now,
Yes.
where I suppose the attention to detail and the ability to manage the detail is easier than it is in an organisation with 20-odd thousand staff and a whole range of independent production companies who are commissioned to make programs. And I suppose we have to say that the reason this independent production sector exists is because in the 70s and 80s, it was decided that there was too much stranglehold by the main broadcasters and that there needed to be an independent sector. It was Margaret Thatcher, who was Prime Minister at the time, who got all that through. And quotas were put out for broadcasters to use a certain amount of content from independent producers.
It's still gobsmacking to me that this could have happened. I obviously run unprecedented. I think I'm going to call myself the Director General from now on. And
I hope you'll give yourself a pay rise.
Tricky subject. The reality is that I would own it. If something went out which was wrong, I'd own it. But I would deal with it. I'd be honest as well. And I want to talk about, after the break, I want to talk about the fact that it's taken 6 months for this to come out. What I don't understand is how can it take 6 months for this fakery to have been exposed? I want to talk about BBC Verify, which is meant to guarantee standards. So much wrong in this story. In the meantime, before we continue, I want to remind you that Claire Dyer is one of our great stalwarts here. Very brave woman, fighting the good fight, exposing injustice any way she can find it, and working hard at it. This is Claire Dyer. Claire Dyer there on twice, probably more often by popular demand. Do see Claire Dyer's Dire Consequences show. She talks about specific issues and they affect us all. But back to my guest today. That's the Chief Executive of the Association for International Broadcasting. Why don't you call yourself the Director General of the AIB? All the rage.
Yes, I'm not sure that's exactly appropriate at the moment, but
really. Also, maybe Tim Davies given that label a bad name. That's the only thing that might put me off it. Story so far: the BBC has been called out for creating a piece of fake news. Who would have believed it? Fake news from the BBC, and it's caused a lot of anger in the White House. An extraordinary thing. The press secretary to the President of the United States, Caroline Levitt, says that BBC 100% fake news, and follow allegations that Panorama documentary misled viewers with its editing of Trump's speech. Now that's pretty serious, Simon. When the President of the United States is outraged by the BBC, I've never known of anything like this before.
Well, presidents and politicians around the world have been upset by the BBC many times before, and they do lash out and complain when they run negative stories about them. In the past, though, those stories have been accurate, true. This is a different kettle of fish entirely. And I think I would disagree with the 100% fake attribution that Caroline Levitt has given to the BBC. There is clearly much stuff that is accurate, that is correct. And occasionally you are, as I said before the break, going to have in an organization of the sort of scale that the BBC is, mistakes that happen.
Yeah.
This is a fundamental problem, though, on this occasion, when it's anything to do with news and current affairs, you have to be far more resilient isn't the right word. It's you have
Rigorous.
Rigorous. Thank you. I knew it was began with an RI. So yes, it's those sort of things that need to be absolutely drummed into people at all levels of the organization. I mean, one of the other things that probably you and certainly I was taught when we first joined the BBC is that you leave your prejudices at the door. We all have prejudices. Everybody is prejudiced in some way about something. But we are all being told that you leave those at the front door when you walk into work in the morning or in the evening or whatever shift you're on, to treat things with respect and to make sure that you investigate and find out what really is going on. You know, it's a bit like the old story of somebody tells you it's raining outside, somebody tells you it's beautiful sunshine in a newsroom. What do you do? How do you judge that? Well, you look out of the window and find out whether it's raining or not. It's basic journalism skills that are so important. And what I fail to understand myself is how this has failed in this case, and how an independent production company has managed to put something together that simply isn't accurate.
My issue here is it happened 6 months ago. Now, BBC Verify is this self-appointed grand idea that they have in the BBC, that they can be the guardians of truth and everything that goes with it. And they say things like, we're here so that you know you can trust us. But they didn't spot it. After all the things they've said about being determined to tell the truth and call out lies from other people, they didn't spot it. And I think, to me, the big issue here is that there will have been more than one person who knew this was a lie, and they've been called out. They didn't volunteer they'd made a mistake. They actually covered up the mistake. And to me, that's unforgivable when you've got all this pompous BBC Verify stuff going on.
Yes, it's an issue. I think it may demonstrate that internal controls are somewhat lacking, behind the times, whatever phrase you want to use. It seems that this whole story has only come to light as a result of a story that the Telegraph newspaper here in the UK has been running for the last week, having been leaked a document by a former member of the editorial standards board at the BBC, and in which he takes line by line through this whole episode. And that was presented to the BBC some time ago. But it's only in the last week, when it was published in a national newspaper in Britain, that it's come to light. And since then, it's taken them a week without having made any comment whatsoever. And now this culmination on Sunday of the resignation of the Director General and the head of news. So that shows that something isn't working, to my mind. I'm not privy to what goes on in New Broadcasting House in central London. Neither of us is. But we have to look at it from the outside and think, this is not how it should be. More alarm bells should have been ringing. The story should have been shut down with an explanation and an apology far sooner than it has been. Because the whole point, if you run a corporate press office, is that if you sniff that a story is about to break about your organization, you find a way of shutting it down before it's all over the newspapers, all over the radio and television. And in this case, that hasn't happened. And I think BBC News is having big issues because the BBC has become the story, which is not a good place for any news organization to be.
Well, that's because they took on the president of the United States with a lie. Now, Donald Trump invented the phrase fake news. He pretty much invented it. Or if he didn't, he certainly popularized it. And the BBC, in all its sanctimony, keeps telling us that it's the guardian of free speech. I even heard about it today. I even heard it today that they were the most trusted organization in the world. That's really risky. It's called hubris, because they've actually taken on the president of the United States of America, the president of the United States. And somebody said to me this really about the whole story before these resignations, said, if they're willing to lie about the president of the United States, who are they not willing to lie about? You can't trust anything. And I have to say, I would throw in all kinds of subject areas. And I think the Ukraine broadcasting is biased. I think that they're completely off beam with the environment, all kinds of other things. But whether I'm right or not, everyone is entitled to be suspicious now.
It is a problem, because as soon as something like this occurs, your reputation is damaged, and rebuilding a reputation takes an awfully long time. You can have, the BBC has been around since 1922, and the international services since 1932. And it takes a long time to build an organization's reputation, and it can be thrown away in a heartbeat. And this is a problem now of how you fight that fire. And I'm sure the lights have been burning over the weekend, well into the night, at Broadcasting House, the headquarters of the BBC, as people strategize, work out where they go from here. This is not a happy place. And it's quite interesting that each of the main political parties in the UK has over the weekend weighed into this and said that things need to change. What that change will be is almost impossible at this moment to forecast, but there will have to be changes. It's quite interesting that the chairman of the BBC is a producer of factual programs called Samir Shah. He's a very nice guy. He's got editorial expertise, and he's in an invidious position now as the chair of the board of the BBC, which is separate from the day-to-day operations, but oversees the whole operation. And he is going to have some sleepless nights, I'm sure, as are many other people within the corporation.
You mentioned political parties, and the Lisa Nandy, who's the culture minister, at least I know the way things are going with the Labour Party, might not be when you're watching this, but she was. And she basically said, BBC had to apologise for edited Trump's speech as minister says decisions not always well thought through. Talk about a lame comment from Lisa Nandy. The broadcaster has been accused of completely misleading its viewers, according to a leaked memo. A couple of thoughts from this. First of all, I did think Lisa Nandy was pretty good, but she's got herself into a lot of hot water recently. She's not really the story today. But decisions not always well thought through. It's a bit of an understatement. They lied. They lied. They spliced two bits of video together, 54 minutes apart, to make it look like Donald Trump was inciting violence. Couldn't be any other reason for them doing it. And I have to say that lame comments like this from ministers make me feel even more there's a degree of collusion. I actually co-set up the all-party parliamentary BBC group. So it's not like I'm against the idea of the BBC, but I'm immensely frustrated by what's going on. And I just don't think the culture minister's really draped herself in glory by being so lame. I don't know. You have to be more careful than me, but what's your view about this and the relationship, perhaps collusion between the government and the BBC?
I think no government in power ever likes the national press or broadcasters. They always think they've got it in for them, whether it's the Labour Party or the Conservative Party here in the UK. Politicians always like to grumble that they've been portrayed badly by using the wrong sound bites or people commenting about what they've said. And I don't think that's ever going to change. And I suspect that's good because if people are on both sides of the political divide are criticizing an organization, probably it means they're getting something right. However, having said that, I think I'm not sure there's collusion. I think we've got an issue here in the UK now that, as I mentioned earlier, that we've got the charter review coming up. We've got the license fee. Will that survive beyond the next at the end of this term, which has got a couple of years to run? How will the BBC be funded? I mean, we have to also look. I think it would be unfair not to mention all the good things that the BBC does. They do bring the country together, whether it's the dancing programs, Strictly Come Dancing, or as it's franchised around the world, Dancing with the Stars, where the whole nation, it comes together to view that, millions and millions of people, as a shared experience, which you don't get with streaming services. You don't have everybody watching something at roughly the same time to find out the result of something. And they do amazing stuff for children's television, educational programming, and the Open University, which was set up by the BBC many years ago. So we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think there has to be a root and branch examination of what's gone wrong, without sweeping stuff under the carpet. And I think we have to look at where the BBC goes from here. One of the issues is that the BBC is looked up to by so many people around the world. It's the model for public broadcasting in many parts of the world where public broadcasting exists. And I think there's going to be sharp intakes of breath across other broadcasters thinking there, but for the grace of God, go I. And it will be a wake-up call to all sorts of people and program producers. And I hope to the independent sector here in the UK, as well as to the BBC, to ITV, to Sky, and indeed to Unprecedented.
Let's have one more consideration about Tim Davie, who resigns as BBC Director General after accusations of serious and systemic bias in coverage. Davie tells staff departure was my own decision, but it comes to the BBC preparing to apologise for the way it edited the Trump speech. There really is no way back whenever your organisation lied about the most powerful man in the Western world and then covered it up for 6 months. I mean, it's hard to believe it. Even when I say it, I think, hang on, maybe I got something wrong there, Simon. But it's true. And as you said, they spent a week doing nothing about it after it came out. And it's only come out because of a whistleblower. It would never have come out. Now, I suppose we're a bit remiss because we didn't spot the splice. If I was really on the ball, I'd have seen that that's what they'd done. But I don't have, 1,000 people watching everything that goes out. Last question on this. Why do you think it's taken 6 months to surface?
I have absolutely no idea. I think the editorial standards, this report went in, from what I gather, and I don't work for the BBC. I'm not there. I'm not across every piece of paper that flows across the editorial standards board or the whole of the board. But it seems that this report was put in and was essentially, from what I can see from the storytelling within the Daily Telegraph here in the UK that has been running this story, was essentially naysayed. It's not an important thing. Nobody actually realised the gravity of the situation, it seems, from the reporting that I've read over the last week or so. And for that to happen shows fundamental flaws, I think, that nobody was inquisitive enough, curious enough, to go and ask lots and lots of questions. Because if something like that lands on your desk and you're in a senior editorial role, it seems to me that you should look at it. You may be a busy person. There may be lots of competing interests on your time. But something saying that a flagship news and current affairs program that goes out in peak time once a week, that's done incredible work. It covered the post office scandal years before it made the ITV drama that has resulted in restitution for sub postmasters and mistresses. It's done all sorts of incredible work over the years. It's a strand that's been running for 40, 50 years on the BBC. But when something like that crosses your desk, I think if you haven't got the curiosity to say, hang on a minute, is that right? Has that really happened? What, somebody go and investigate, or I'll go and investigate. I think that shows a slight lack of judgment.
Yeah, you said before that this is about franchising out. Just explain what changed from the BBC making all its own shows to farming them out. What was the difference?
Well, the difference was it was to try and take to grow the industry, and it's worked quite well because huge numbers of programs are made by independents as well as in-house. But there's a quota system that existed for programs to be made by independents, and that's created a very vibrant independent production centre here in the UK, a big industry. Lots of independent producers making all sorts of programs for the BBC, for Sky, for ITV, for Channel 4, and the streaming companies as well.
Yeah.
But I think what's happened is for core output like news and current affairs to be put out to independents without the right people overseeing it. And I suspect, we could say that the right people clearly haven't overseen this for this episode of Panorama to ask the right questions. I think it calls into question, as I said earlier, the internal processes in the BBC, and it also calls into question the training that's gone on in the people that work for independent producers. Who obviously haven't been told you leave your prejudices at the door, and you make sure that any edits you do are clearly identifiable if you are changing the meaning of a piece of film, video, radio.
You shouldn't change the meaning. I've watched Panorama pretty much more than my adult life. I used to find it very scary because it's usually quite a depressing program, but I never doubted it. But now I do. And it's so disappointing when one of the crown jewels of current affairs reporting falls on its face like this. You think, what else are they lying about? Obviously, my views about environment are very clear. There isn't a climate crisis. And I've been extremely annoyed with the BBC for refusing to entertain both sides in that subject. But others, even if they didn't agree with me, surely must become more suspicious that these narratives that they put forward could actually be somewhat fake.
It's a difficult situation. It's going to take a lot of work to recover from this, a huge amount of work, and I wouldn't want to be in several people's shoes within the BBC at the moment. I don't know what else we can really say.
I'd like to be Director General. I'd take the job. I'm
right,
sure you would.
Well, I'll give you a reference, perhaps.
I'll give you one too. I think you've got more chance.
I think the other issue is whether members of the public, en masse, think this is an important issue that they need to be aware of, or whether they just say, it's just, I'm not really bothered, they've got this wrong, let's move on. I don't know which way it's going to fall.
I think it's the latter. The truth is, you and I can talk about this because we're in the business. But for most people, they'll say, oh, well, I always thought Trump was all right, or I always thought he was no good. And it probably won't make a huge difference. But unfortunately for the BBC, as you said, they're renegotiating the big thing, the charter. And this doesn't look good whenever you're trying to negotiate for lots of money, lots and lots and lots of money from the government. But maybe they are in cahoots. Maybe things are better under Labour than I thought. But we'll leave that aside. Thank you for that. Before we go, though, it's only right that you tell us about your awards. If you're watching this live, the awards are on the 14th of November, 2025. Tell us about the Association for International Broadcasting Awards again.
We've been running them for the last 21 years. They celebrate journalism and factual productions across television, radio, and digital platforms. We have a global panel of judges, 58 judges, in fact, spread from Argentina through to Australia and lots of places in between. We get hundreds of hours of television and radio content coming into us each year. And a shortlist was prepared, and then programs have gone out to our judges. And then on the 14th of November, this coming Friday, if you're watching this in that week, we get a gathering together of broadcasters, editors, journalists from all over the world. I think we've got people coming from about 23 countries, which is incredibly humbling that they come to find out who has won and whether they've won one of these rather coveted, attractive awards that were designed by an Italian-British artist, Anna Mazzotta, which we introduced last year. So we've got this amazing gathering. It's going to be an interesting set of conversations, I think, following the revelations that you and I have been discussing today about the storytelling, whether it's factual or not, within the BBC. But despite that, there are stories that need to be told and that are told through the work that is presented in the AIBs. And so on Friday, the 14th, we will be finding out exactly who has won and what sort of programs and productions and news coverage they were, whether it's earthquakes in Myanmar to the situation in Gaza and so forth. So it's all happening on Friday. And I think, Lembit, we'd better send you an invitation.
Oh, no reasonable offer refused. Thanks very much indeed. Unaccustomed I am to public scrounging. Thanks very much indeed for that. It'll be a pleasure. And I'm guessing that Panorama will not be put forward as factual documentary.
They haven't made the shortlist this year, but I'm not sure they actually put anything in this year. They have in the past, and I think they've won in years gone by. Maybe it was a different set of editors, and maybe it was... Anyway, we won't go there at this moment.
Well, great. That's the AIBs, and it's great to see the Association for International Broadcasting going from strength to strength. Thank you so much. That's Simon Spanswick, Chief Executive Officer of the AIB, the Association for International Broadcasting. Always great to have him on. I hope that enlightened you a bit about the travails in the BBC. My closing thoughts: many people say, why do you watch the BBC? I watch it so that you don't have to. But actually, I don't want to damn the entire station. They gave me great training, great training across the many years I worked there. And I would not belittle their technical quality at all. My personal view is that in recent years, they've let their own agendas get too involved with the output. Simon Spanswick there said, you leave your opinions and your prejudices at the door. My opinion, my view was that that wasn't happening so much in the last years that I was working there. But there are many great journalists and great reporters and great people in the business all over the world who started out in the BBC. So let's be realistic. These bad things don't damn everybody, the tens of thousands of people involved with the BBC, but they've got to get it right, because the hubris is, they say, you can trust us. We better make sure we can. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Lembit Öpik. That was Lembit Öpik Live here on Unprecedented TV. Once we get an update, if you're watching this live, from Warren Thornton in the eye of the storm, quite literally, in that great tempest in the Philippines, we'll let you know as well. And those will be breaking stories through the day. Also, it'll be interesting, if you're watching this in the archive, to compare with what we've said with what's actually happened in the BBC and beyond. I'm Lembit Öpik. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.
Immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the return of the sausages.